I've talked about scanning, I talked about scheming. Now I want to talk about comprehension. Comprehension, to comprehend is to understand. And when I talk of comprehension, I'm talking about reading by paying attention to the detail. Now you're talking about the argument. What is the article saying? How does it respond to others? That's what comprehension is. And there are 4 tactics you can use for comprehension. One, of course, is to read. The other one is to highlight important points and good quotes. Please don't underline university books. Be nice. If you have a hard copy of university books, don't underline. Partly because not only are you spoiling for the next person, but also you don't keep your own notes. So it's actually useless to underline. So the third one is to make notes in the margin if you're reading an online version, or you make notes on your laptop. So sometimes, especially for old books where there's no e-copy, I actually sit next to my laptop when I'm reading, because I won't be able to underline the book. I won't be able to find the point that I wanted. So it's good if you have a file where you're putting your notes so that you can come back to those notes later on, even when you don't have the book. But if you have an e-copy that is yours, you can make notes in the margin. And the notes in the margin, and I'm going to show you what I have. The notes in the margin are not just notes, but you can also ask questions. You can also have a conversation with yourself saying, I remember seeing this somewhere else, like that. And then you can also write an annotated bibliography. What is an annotated bibliography? An annotated bibliography is a bibliography which explains what each of the items is about. So it's like a book list, but for each item you say, this is what this book is about. And I'm going to show you my own examples so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, let me start with an article which is so controversial that I put many notes on it when I was reading. It was really interesting. And because I didn't agree with it, not because I agreed with it. One of the questions I've been asking before now, I share it. One of the other questions that has disturbed me, apart from the arrogance of academics, is the misuse of tradition. And I'm going to talk about that a little more when I talk about fallacies. People, whenever they want to hide themselves from criticism, they say that's African culture. So I wanted to ask, what exactly, who says that something is African tradition? And so I stumbled upon this article. It was not what I was looking for, but it ended up being so enlightening. So this is the article. And this guy was talking about how Anglophone or conservatism from the British tradition might be a way for Africans to preserve their culture and still grow economically. It's a lot of BS. But anyway, by BS, I mean Bible study. So how I've highlighted, we are talking about comprehension. This is how I've highlighted, because this is an article that I want to use later on. So I don't know, I hope, first of all, let me just go through this thing and let me not assume people know. Use what is Adobe? You need to open documents. If you're reading articles, you need to open them in Adobe, because Adobe allows you to highlight. As you can see, I have many comments. So normally when you open Adobe, it looks like this. So one of the things I do when I'm reading is that I highlight the argument, the main thesis of the argument. And the reason I do this is because later on, when you're trying to summarize the article, you will need to quote, not quote exactly, but you will need to talk about the main argument of the paper. So that's how you read closely. You highlight what is important. And then, like I said, the other thing to do And when you highlight, it automatically it comes in the comments. Let me just show you what happens when you open Adobe. Normally, it will come. Let me just close this. This is what you will get. It will look basically like this. So if you scroll down over here, you know, this is the one for scrolling the article itself. But if you scroll here on the side, it will give you the different menus that are available. And comment is where all your highlights will appear. So if you go to my highlights and you go to the comments, you can see that they match. This one, it matches here. Okay, so that's what you do as you're reading. You keep highlighting using your pen, and you can even change colors. That's a good thing about it. Like now, if I put my cursor there, you can change the colors. So I can change that to orange, and then you can have some fancy things. Keep yourself entertained as you're reading. So you highlight like the main, you highlight the main arguments or things which you think you need to remember, or you can even highlight nice statements that are worth quoting, so that when you come back to the article later on, you don't have to figure out what was that he said. That's one way in which you read. Now, if you scroll down my comments, you will see that there are some places where I highlight and write. In this case, why did I write? The excuse that, incrementalism, that was what KICD used to say. So this statement that was made, it reminded me of the term incrementalism. So I wrote it in the comment there. Then this one it reminded me of an article by Rutger Bregman, who has written an article on that people are generally good, which is something that is not assumed in the Eurocentric vision. Then there are some times where I even reply to the article as if they can hear me, like this one. I've written a point here, and I've written two authors whom I would use to oppose what this guy is saying. So this is Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks, and Louis Gordon, who writes a lot about the philosophy of knowledge, and on like that. Let me see if I have a long comment. Yeah, this is, again, I was disagreeing, so I put some notes there. Here, I reminded myself, what does Fanon say in relation to what this guy is saying? And I put something there. There's one where I agreed and wrote, I disagreed and wrote a long note over here. And then you can see I have written so many notes about this article because it has so many fallacies which I need to reply to when I get time. So how do you do this? What you do is that if you highlight like that, and you put, let's see, put orange color there, it appears here, and then you can write. You can write a comment here. Okay, and then when you say post, then you have a permanent record. And you can see a small comment button here. It shows, in fact, if you put your cursor there, it shows what your comment is. So that's how you read for comprehension. You have to write notes. If you have a what do you call it? If you have a physical book that is not yours, have a file. Have a file where you write your notes, so that you can always check what later on, even when you lose the book, you can always come back to those notes and you know, remember where you got that quote from. I'm trying to write a book. So whenever I read books which I feel I want to include in the book project, I write notes on it. You have to take notes. You can't not take notes. So if you can't read in the, I mean, if you're going to read something which is important for your academic work, you have to take notes. So you have to be seated somewhere where you can sit on your laptop, type what you're thinking, type whether you agree or not with the article, so that now when you come back to now putting all your materials together and writing the article, you have notes from everywhere where you just pull them out, put them together. Yeah, and that's how you make your writing easier, and that's how you make research easier. You have to be taking notes, commenting as you write, asking yourself, do I agree or not? You know, all those questions which I put for you on the portal next to Michere Mogo's article. You have to keep doing that your whole academic life. Yeah, I don't know when yours will end, but as long as you're a student and you want to eventually do some research, that's how you have to write. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I'll answer questions, is about analysis. So there's a part of your understanding the article as you read, and you're responding to the article as you read. But also sometimes you have to think, even when you finish what you're reading, you have to assess. And that's what analysis is. Analysis is assessing the writing in terms of, there are at least 3 things you need to consider. What is its value to your work? Yeah, so the introductions I give to the articles I'm showing you, I'm already telling you why this article was important to the kind of work I do. Then, so you assess the writing in terms of its value to your work, its significance. What does significance mean? Significance means how many people are quoting it. So in your field, whatever field you're doing, there are some seminal articles, seminal meaning like sort of like the classic article, which everybody quotes. Yeah? In everybody's field, there's that kind of article. So you need to know what is its significance. In literature, for example, there was a time when post-colonial theory was a big thing and everybody was using it. So there were 2 articles. God, how can I forget their names? There were 2 by Shohat. One was Shohat and someone. And that was like the article everybody quoted when they were referring to post-colonial theory. So you have to know what is the contribution of that article. And how will you know? By keeping on reading. The more you read, the more you will see that there's somebody's name which keeps coming up. And then you know, oh, this guy and this particular article are sort of like the trend-setting articles of my field or of the topic that I'm researching. So there's the significance and the contribution to the conversation. What does that article do? So like Phillip Curtin's article, the one I've given you, is a big deal when it comes to African studies because it highlighted the problems of that African and African-American scholars confront as academics. So it became a very important article. So you have to know the value of what you've read to your work, its significance, and its contribution to the conversation. And how do you analyze the article? You analyze it through the context. When was the article written? So you need to look at the year of publication, and the institution where it was published. So, for example, if an article is published, and I think even Michere Mogo mentions this in her response to Phillip Curtin, she says, hey, this is a guy who is a guru of African history, and he's based at Johns Hopkins University. Where? So you have to take those articles seriously. If you're talking about Skip Gates at Harvard, or Tandika Mkandawire, who was at LSE, or Godwin Murunga, who is at Codestria, those, when they say something, you notice and you read. So you have to think, and then also the other thing is, and this is where the lie of objective knowledge is, the fact that they come from those universities usually adds weight, or institutions, it usually adds weight to what they're saying. So if you're reading economics and you're quoting Pandawide, that's a big deal. So whoever tells you objectivity, that's a lie, doesn't exist. So you look at you also look at the context. One of the things I told a master's class, I'm not sure they understood me because I must have sounded a bit off. One of the things I have said is that you have to understand knowledge in terms of the history when it emerged. So if you're talking about articles like in my field, articles that came between late 90s and about 2010, a lot were on post-colonial theory. And there's an article I wrote in Al Jazeera where I explained what was happening at the time that made so many articles of a certain nature come out at that time. And I think it's kind of hinted at in what Michele says. In the 90s, when the IMF hit the African universities, well, they hit universities everywhere, but African universities were hit in a particular way. And then add on top of that, the exile of many intellectuals. So you find a lot of intellectuals from the Third World were in American and British universities, but mainly American. So when they got to America, they started saying, oh, you know, we are here as people who are privileged but not privileged. We are here as academics and we have good positions, but at the same time, we come from countries that are doing badly. What does that mean in terms of our responsibility as intellectuals? Some of them said, don't hold me responsible, I'm here for me, leave me alone. And others were like, if you're here and you're from a certain country that's suffering, it's your right. You have to speak for the people you left behind. So that was the tension that was happening in the academy. And so it produced a lot of work around that kind of, it's not even a theme. It was an influence. People were grappling with, should we speak for where we came from or should we just be individual academics doing our own thing? Post-2015, I would say, especially after Obama, when it was clear that racism did not go because Obama, a Black man, was president. Then now people start getting interested in how come racism is not going, and people started to see it's because of capitalism. So now that you're finding more work being done on how race interacts with public policy and economics. So you're finding a lot of articles. In fact, I just saw one of the ladies who talks about race and education. I've seen she has come out with another article, another book, and she's talking about, what is it? Prisons, I think, prisons and race. So after this, I'm going to check what the book is about. So, you know, generally, articles follow certain certain political histories, and you need to have a good grasp of history to know where certain debates came from. In Kenya, I would say that, which is something that I'm starting to research a little more, and which you might have seen from what I've been reading, I've started researching more about why did Kenyan academics do the kind of work they were doing in the 1970s. Remember, the 1970s is two things. One, African countries and Kenya has become independent. There was a lot of hope that things would work out, that the government would work, people would get education and healthcare and all those things, and it didn't happen. The economy wasn't growing. But the second thing was that academics and artists and people and politicians who spoke out suffered. So Goge wa Thiong'o was detained in 1977. What else happened? Later on, a lot of Kenyans went into exile. So you're talking about people like Michere Mogo, Atieno Odhiambo, Anyang' Nyong'o. Who else? There was this other guy in Jonjo, Apollo Jonjo, who was a historian. There were a number of people who ended up having to leave. So that was the 70s. So when you read cultural production in that sense, I mean, when you read about, when you know what was happening historically, then it makes you understand why did people write the way they wrote. Of course, people now, especially if they were still in Kenya, they had to write their articles in a way that did not directly mention government or mention anything political. And unfortunately, that habit has stayed. But we call it objectivity these days. That habit of avoiding controversy when it comes to academics, it has stuck. I need to forward you a very nice short forward that was written by Godwin Murunga about this. That what also happened was that academics started becoming very shy in voicing anything related to reality. And they started reading less. And then in the 90s, when neoliberalism hit us very hard, academics started becoming consultants and started doing work outside of the academy, getting consultancies, meeting in hotels. So the interest wasn't in ideas anymore. It was more in getting ahead, getting appointments. So what that meant is that ideas suffered, supervision of students suffered. Then you have the growth of the administrative academic. So now people are famous because they got administrative positions more than because they did certain work. So once you understand that history, you can place things that are written during this period in that time. For example, and this is where Michere Mogo is coming from. She's saying, some of us are here not because we chose to be here, it's because your governments are supporting ours in suppressing academic freedom. So we had to run. So we are not here in the US because we just took a holiday and thought, let's settle here. We are here because we couldn't stay at home. And so when you complain that there are too many African academics, you're not taking into account that some of us are here because we had to. And Atieno Odhiambo was also in the same boat. He had to flee Kenya, got a job at Rice University. So you can imagine him being an exile, and then you see this article saying, why are Africans here? This is ghettoization. Utter nonsense. Anyway, I've already shown you my bias. So you have to know the context, and you have to know the institutions where people are writing from. Then you have to also know the author. Why is the author writing what they are writing? Who is the author and what is their place in society? Why did they write? And here, please, you're allowed to make inferences. This objectivity thing, it has destroyed our ability to think, because people are like, in my opinion. Of course, your article is an opinion. You can't keep on saying, in my opinion, in my opinion. Okay, but talk to your advisor. Me, I don't see the point. Because when I come to an article, I assume it's your opinion. So you don't need to keep saying in your opinion. But Kenya is different. So it's up to you to balance. But knowing the writer is important. Knowing the writer, who they are, how they came to writing what they're writing. Because a lot of people, their writing is influenced by their experience, not just by their academic study. And this is something that African and people of color from the global South have been saying, that people's writing is influenced by who they are. So you can't just come to an article and say, oh, this is not objective. Of course it's not objective. Nobody said, I mean, us, we don't care whether it's objective. What we want to know is, does it make sense? So it's important to know the author and the place in society. And that's why you find, if you look in Michere Mogo's article, she makes she makes reference to this. And then, of course, you use the evidence either in what you're reading, or you look for other information about the person. And that's why I've been telling you how to do research. So if you want to know about Phillip Curtin, more than what Michelle Mogo says in her article, you now do research and find out who is this guy. Why is he so important that a whole conference had to put panels to respond to him? So you look for that information. You have to know who the writers are. And you don't have to include it, but I think it's important as background knowledge. So I've talked about knowing the writer. You also need to know the assumptions. And this comes up a lot in Michelle Mogo's article. You know, what assumptions is the writer making? And assumptions, by the way, and this is where Kenyans have a problem, Kenyan academics. They think that if the assumption is not stated, you can't infer. You can. You know, if a guy from Johns Hopkins is saying there are too many Africans in this history department, you are allowed to say, of course, he's saying this because that. And yes, you're judging. Yes. I don't think there's anything wrong with judging. Be judged based on evidence. So, and you can do that as long as you provide the evidence that makes you infer from what you've read the person to say, and from what you know of the person, you're allowed to make a judgment that this is what they are assuming. Another source of assumptions is society. You're members of society. In Kenya, it's assumed that if you're doing a master's, you have access to resources. I'm not saying that that is the case, but that's the assumption. Why? Because you must have had enough resources to go to school, you must have resources to pay for your studies. So when you're writing, you can even say, Dr. Wandia assumed that I am rich just because I am a master's student. She doesn't understand. That's why she made the statement she made. Did I say that you're rich? No. But you're making that assumption based on a value in Kenyan society. You can say in Kenya, it is assumed that if you're doing a master's, it means you have a lot of resources. And this is probably where her judgment, her assessment of my paper is coming from. She's thinking, I have enough resources, but actually the truth is, I wrote from a different perspective. So you have to talk about the presuppositions of not have to talk about, but you have to keep in mind those kinds of presuppositions and not to be shy and say, no, I'm not going to assume anything because I'm not judging. It's wrong. And you see what makes me frustrated about those things is that it puts handcuffs on people and makes them not think, because they are afraid of being seen to judge. Judge as long as you can provide the evidence. And then you can also talk about, when you're talking about presuppositions, you can also talk about what are your assumptions. It's okay. It's okay to do these things. And by the way, most lecturers might not agree with me, but me, I'm just telling you because it's out there. It's just maybe Kenya, Kenya is very conservative, so we catch up like 10 years later. So I'm just telling you what is happening now. Don't be surprised if you're not allowed to do some of the things I'm saying you can do. Then you can also talk about the knowledge of the time. What were people talking about that around the time this article was written? So if you're looking, for example, at the 1960s, a lot of Kenyan academics were trying to reconstruct our national history. That's what they were trying to do. And you can feel it. They don't say it, but you can feel it in what they are talking about. So you have a lot of historical studies, people saying this is what used to happen. There was also return to culture. How can our cultures inform our information? So it's normal to say that that is what was happening. And that's the kind of knowledge that was being produced. And you're allowed to judge based on what you're seeing from the articles or books published around that time. And then you also need to ask, what is this text telling you without directly saying it? This is so important because people feel, oh, I'm judging, I can't say that. No, judge. So you should be able to say, there's a very widely quoted article by Atieno Odhiambo called what is it? Something about ideology. Yeah, so you can read that article and without even seeing, without Atieno Odhiambo saying it, you can say Atieno Odhiambo is addressing the autocracy of Kenya at the time, the intellectual autocracy of the time. And then finally, apart from the knowledge of what is called epistemology, you can now come to the questions which I was asking you. How does what you're reading relate to what other people have read? How does it relate to what you're looking for or what you're interested in? What are the differences and the similarities between what some people are saying and what others are saying? So for example, when, what's her name? This lady who wrote Dead Aid, Dambisa Moyo, when she wrote Dead Aid about how aid is not helping Africa, one of the reviews I read, and I completely agree, said, okay, what she's saying is completely on point, but it's not something that people haven't been saying for the last 10 years. So that's a comparison. It's a comparison between what the book itself says and what others in the same field have said. So that's how to read a book or to read an article. First, what I've talked about is choosing. How do you choose what to read? How do you, when you've chosen, this is something I'm going to read, how do you sit down and make maximum use of it? And then now I've talked about how do you analyze it? How do you know whether it is something that is useful to your study? You look at the author, the context in which they wrote, its contribution to the discussion, and you know what you actually think of it. You know, does this author, do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Are there things you don't understand? Are there things which they don't explain? Maybe they explain them later. You know, those kinds of questions. That's what helps you to read. So you're asking, how do I get the culture of reading? You have to see these articles as written by human beings. I think that's the first thing. This nonsense of objectivity and I don't know what it does is that it makes students feel as if these articles are from heaven, as if they are not written by people somewhere. So once you get into your mind that these articles are written by people in certain debates, then it becomes easier for you to read because you're reading with that background idea that Freud wrote in the 1910s when everybody was perplexed about social change. There had been revolutions, there had been, what else was happening around that time? There had been revolutions and people were perplexed about how to deal with certain psychosocial problems. And then Freud came up with the idea that, you know, because before people used to put electricity, Europeans, they're crazy. They would put electricity, you know, shock you and whatever. But then Freud finally saw, oh, we can access people's subconscious. You know, what are the things they are thinking, but they are not conscious that they are thinking. Maybe that's a way to understand the mental health issues that they have. And so what they did, so then that's how he came up with psychoanalysis. So you listen to people's stories, it was dreams. Listen to people's dreams and use what they tell you through their dreams or their stories. You use that to analyze what are they really thinking. So that's how knowledge comes up. It doesn't come from the air and from white people through the great lecturer in Kenya who decides whether you get a job or not. That whole power tripping, remove it. Remove it and decide you're going to look at knowledge just as it is produced by human beings. And I think that's what Michelle Moyo's article does. She just strips Curtin's article of this flamboyance, oh, big name, big word. And she says, bottom line, this is where we are talking from. He's not considering the context we are in, and this is the context. And then after she lays out the context, then she says what the article is saying. So that probably, I hope that can interest you. And that's why, sorry to say, those of you who didn't like literature, poleni sana, because that is where you get me. In fact, I read articles, I'm laughing at people. I'm like, ha, of course so-and-so would say this. Because I know, I look at people as characters. I say, this is, Skip Gates would say something like this. You have to look at reading academic work as any human enterprise. And you just read the articles the way they are, written by people in institutions who are influenced in certain ways. I would say that that's a way to be able to get into the habit of reading. So if probably history is an important thing, I don't know how good you are at history, but I think history is very, very important if you're to learn how to read.